I actually forget which exchange it was. I posted something on Facebook and then you posted something after it. And it's a question I've been living with, it seems like for months, but I think it's for 2 days, which is noticing the outpouring of solidarity, goodwill, kindness, connection, actually, not touching, but like I'm on Zoom half the day. And also that things that, beg pardon?
It feels so nourishing to be on Zoom with people.
Totally. Yeah, I noticed the things that I've been putting out for years, sort of voice in the wilderness, gave up that, anything that I thought was actually going to land in society in a significant way. Suddenly it all seems possible again. And without activating, hope, and I know we're supposed to hope, but, for me, I really like gritty reality now. It's like, not the spectrum of hope and hopelessness, but the
Who gave you orders to hope?
What?
Who gave you orders to hope?
I don't know.
You're supposed to hope.
Yeah, I did hope. I was like new possibilities. I was always living in possibility and constructing in the present moment forms that would hold a possibility for the future. But what I'm thinking about now, and I think it's very similar to what you're thinking about, is, what is arising now as a possibility that we've been holding, like faithful to for many years, not exactly expecting in this current cultural environment that it's going to take hold. And yet here it is. Things are fluid and open, and I know that, Milton Friedman said, basically, when there's a crisis, people enact ideas that have been laying around. And so here, whether it's ideas that have been laying around for you or whether it's new ideas, but like, what is it we can articulate and anchor now? So that we actually create it to be ideas that are lying around. As we emerge from the pandemic and the sort of open portal starts to close down and business as usual is like forcing itself upon us like a really bad lover. And so, wait a second, did I say that? No, I did. Anyway, at whatever level, politics, policies, projects, books, frameworks, memes, stories, what is it that you want to see anchored in this moment from this experience that we're going through, that we can begin to plant and water?
Yeah,
that's the big question. And over to you.
The planting image is a good one because the ideas aren't laying around any more than seeds are laying around. They're there with all their potential, and they need a willing soil and fertile conditions to grow in. And we've got different conditions now. Different seeds can sprout. So that I've been thinking about this very deeply in some stuff that I've written recently. I've just come off a 1-hour call that I invited people onto, and like 104 people showed up.
Wow.
And to talk about this and want to do it again. So that's some of what's going on. There's a recognition. And interestingly, Vicki, I asked people to describe their moods. Hardly anybody spoke about terror and freak out. Some did, but actually often in combination with a sense of enthusiasm, creativity, hope. There's a sense, at least among the people that are on this call, is that there's a moment here in which something different is possible. We're in a breakdown between systems. When we emerge from this epidemic, you said, well, it assumes that we emerge from it, number one. Number two, assumes there's not another one, lurking around the corner. We've been disrupting ecosystems and the human natural interface for decades. And there's consequences to things like that. So we're in a mess that's very disruptive. The global economy is, or at least the US economy is shut down, the California economy is shut down, the global economy is shutting down to varying degrees. We've never seen that before. You know, to some degree, life goes on just fine without that. To some degree, it's a god-awful mess. You know, you have some people focusing on how do we keep ourselves healthy and get through this physical danger more or less intact. And you have other people saying, well, hell, we should get the economy back up. And if it means some old people die, what the heck? I mean, you know, governor of whoever said that on camera the other day. So there's very different ways of experiencing what we're living through. But I mean, this is probably the only time in my life I've ever agreed with Milton Friedman. You know, when things are stopped, there's an opportunity for something else to happen. It's like, you know, you look at the eddies in a stream. If you're going down white water, there's patterns in the water. You disrupt those patterns, they reform, sometimes in other ways. You know Ty Cashman, old friend of mine, former New Alchemy Institute guy. He wrote a wonderful piece decades ago saying that the stage is bare. Think about the stage of the world is bare. It's empty and it's waiting for a new story. And if somebody shows up on that stage with a new story, it has a very different potential when the stage is bare than when the stage is full of all kinds of people carrying on doing their usual things. We're in an unusual moment in human history, and we don't know what's going to happen. You know, and a lot of people talk with great certainty and declarativeness about, you know, we are doomed or we are not doomed. This is good, this is bad. Trump will do this, Trump will do that. Well, you know, if anything, this is the most powerful lesson I've ever seen in my life of the utter contingency of human existence. I didn't know a month ago that my world was going to turn upside down. I mean, some people knew that. I certainly didn't know it 3 months ago. Certainly, you know, wouldn't have predicted the total grinding to a halt of life in California, the fifth largest economy in the world. So we don't know. You know, we act as if we know, but we don't know. But it's not completely random because we're living agents in this process. So how do we work this now? How do we not just take care of ourselves physically? And we're all very focused on that. You know, we've learned to wash our hands and treat our front doors like the airlock of a space station, all that good stuff. You know, we haven't figured out what to do about what we like to call earning a living. You know, we've had whole chunks of our income vanish, and we're better off than most. We don't know what this means politically and geopolitically. We don't know what the economy looks like coming out of this. So the question that I'm living in is, you know, how do we orient ourselves to this? How do we listen? What do we notice? What's our mood? What kind of moves can we make? Where is there leverage to plant some of those seeds that you talked about into fertile ground? You know, there's people talking about UBI, universal basic income, and whether they're saying here's $1,000 or here's $1,000 a month, or whatever the thing turns out to be. Pardon me. It takes me back to Edward Bellamy's book, Looking Backwards, from the 1880s, was it? Remarkable book, very little regarded, but one of the things he talked about then was what we now call universal basic income. He said we have enough productive capacity in the future world he was looking back from that we can produce what we need to sustain human well-being without very much labor. And so rather than have your income and therefore your ability to eat and have a roof over your head tied to the work that you do, what if we had that be part of your birthright? Now, the conservatives think that if you do that, people will just goof off and take drugs and screw around all the time. And others of us think that if you did that, if you remove the fear of survival from people, people would actually be creative and innovative and contributory and invent things and do things with their neighbors. And it's very, you know, very different philosophy of human existence. But we seem to have an invitation for that 140-year-old vision from Bellamy to try, what if we tried something like that now? It's a remarkable time. Trump is adopting things from Bernie Sanders' platform. Biden is adopting things from Bernie Sanders' platform, and Andrew Yang's and various others. And they're, talking about a $2 or $2.5 or $3 trillion stimulus package. Have you noticed that nobody's asking where do we get the money to pay for that?
Right.
You talk about healthcare for all, they say, where are you going to get the money to pay for that? You talk about military budget, they never ask the question. You talk about the Green New Deal, where are you going to get the money to pay for that? You talk about stimulus package to rescue the economy from complete collapse. Nobody asks the question of where you're going to get the money to pay for that. Where you're going to get the money is that you're going to make up the money. And that will generate activity and prosperity and wealth that make things work out in the mix, without getting into too much detail of that. But there's the opportunity for that conversation, so much so that it's not just crazy Bernie from Brooklyn saying that. It's being discussed across the board. There's arguing over the details, but there's remarkably no argument about the need and the ability to do that. So what would happen if we can take that kind of phenomenon of, there's still ideological differences, but not in the same way. Some of them are gone. What truck can we drive through those open doors? What story can we tell on that stage? And so, I questioned you before about the what you said, the requirement that we hope. I bristled at that because hope isn't a strategy, but engage creative action with some sense of possibility and community. That's pretty interesting, and something shows up out of that that's kind of like hope. It's not hope sitting at home saying, golly, I hope things will work out. I hope they will take care of stuff. I hope it'll be okay. No. I hope it'll be okay, and I'm going to make moves in my life that contribute to that, for my family, for my community, and wherever I can find leverage point for the country and the world. That was long. Sorry.
No, that's perfect. It's exactly what I was looking for. So I have a couple questions. So you talked about leverage points, and of course, UBI is one of them that we're noticing that suddenly Andrew Yang's not so crazy. Mm-hmm. And so do you think that's the sort of the first truck that we drive through the opening? And if that truck were to go through the opening, is that something like that we could get, like, not as just like a wartime economy, for a pandemic, but how does that get anchored, and what else is attached to a UBI, that's sort of looks a little bit more like a robust strategy?
Yeah, great question. I think the first truck is serious pandemic response. You look at the curves, and they're very different in China and South Korea and Singapore than they are in the United States and Italy. What we saw in those other countries in different ways was focused, consistent, aggressive action, which is not what we're doing here. So that's except we're doing it here, it's on state by state level. So that's good. California, New York, other states are making those moves themselves. We're not coordinated nationally. That's truck number one, I think. The wartime economy came about, I think, out of two things. One was an unquestioned, visible danger. Hardly anybody questioned whether we were at war or not. Hardly anybody questions that now with COVID, although there are some that do. And the other was you had a leader who was respected and trusted, who could stand up and say, this is what we need to do. And people said, yes, sir, we will do that. We will take on the personal commitment and responsibility and sacrifice to do that because we recognize a shared interest. And the shared interest here has been broken to some degree, not only by President Trump, but actually before him. We've had social fraying before him. So he's not in a position to do that, even if he wanted to. The leadership falls to the states. And we're seeing some serious action in some of the states who don't have the ability to print money the way the federal government does, but who can do things, as we are already seeing. So I don't know what UBI looks like at a state level. I don't know what the politics of UBI are on a national level. There's like almost a moral dispute about whether it's a good thing to do or not. But things may get so broken that people get desperate enough to try things they never would have tried before. Because clearly, you know, with whatever unemployment rate we're going into, whatever loss of economic flow we're going into, we have to find a way to sustain people. Even, you know, even if it's such a tangle, but I mean, you know, I'm thinking now about the hospital capacity question. I want to just kind of put that on the side for a moment because it's a bit of a different question. It's a time of experimentation. You know, let's take those seeds and try them out. Good old Ross Perot years ago talked about the notion of a kind of federalist experimentation system. Let's have different states try different things. Let's different counties and states try different things. Because the fact is, nobody knows for sure what's going to work here. You know, you and I have ideas that we maybe favor and maybe share. And I can be fervent about the ones that I care about. I can't guarantee they're going to work. I trust what I've learned well enough to say I'm willing to try that, but I don't know for sure. And I don't know if you might have a better idea, or if a Republican governor in some red state has a better idea. So it's a time to not look at the strategies through the ideological lenses that we're used to, but through an experimental lens that says, let's diagnose the problem clearly. Let's look at different ways of responding to that diagnosis, and let's watch the results and see what we get.
Do you have
cycle that quickly? You know, one of the great strengths. Sorry to interrupt, but one of the great strengths of the Silicon Valley phenomenon is this willingness to accept failure and a willingness to change course quickly, change strategies quickly, try things, see if they work. If they don't work, drop it, move on to something else, rather than continue to beat the same early idea until it dies. It would be great to see if we can adopt that kind of thinking into the public sphere. We tried in Palo Alto. It's a city that likes to consider itself the heart of Silicon Valley. But it's a government like any other, and it has really long planning cycles. In some of the projects we worked on, the planning cycle lasted longer than the problem would have lasted in the world. I mean, you can't take 2 years to figure out how to do something, and then 2 years to do it, and then 2 years to evaluate it if you're dealing with a 6-month or 12-month problem. You've got to be able to move quickly and experiment and learn and change. So doors wide open for stuff like that. And again, we're seeing leadership at primarily state level, some city level. There are things the feds could do with different leadership. That's not in the mix right now, so we need to move other ways.
Mm-hmm. So do you see one possibility as a sort of a framework that, private good versus public good, that like after the UBI truck or the getting through the pandemic truck, there's something about this individualism that we have maxed out on and has proven wanting, and that there will be something called civics, public good, public health, public services. It turns out that the swamp is actually what runs our lives, an appreciation, and I would say a little bit conservative. I'm not pushing this as my best idea. I'm just listening to you, but it sounds like you're seeing that as in of itself as a productive shift.
I think so, and I think it's happening all around us. Now, I mean, we say we; it doesn't mean 100% of we, but there's a realization and a momentum moving through society that there is a we, or remembering,
right?
There is a we, and that my health. I mean, this is not metaphoric. My health right now literally depends on public health. If there's not public health, I can't be healthy. If there's not public health, my wife might die because she's in a double vulnerable risk category. And it's not a luxury, and it's not something for a few people, because we are all of us vulnerable. And in a country with, 20 or 30 million people without health insurance or without access affordable access to healthcare, that's a risk factor for everybody. So some of us look at that and say, from a sense of human solidarity, we want everybody to have healthcare. Great. Some of us look at that from the sense of, damn, if those people don't have healthcare, I'm in trouble. Okay,
Right.
fine, either way. But it opens the conversation that universal healthcare, and I don't, whether it's Medicare for all or some other mechanism matters less. But if we can come out of this with a commitment to universal healthcare as a fundamental aspect of public health, we've moved something very big. Take that and extrapolate that to other issues. How do we rediscover a sense of community and shared responsibility and civic responsibility in a highly fragmented world? Fernando Flores said last week that one of the unexpected consequences of this pandemic is that we are increasingly recognizing that we're one planet, and that we're one biology. There's not like your biology and mine, or Chinese bat biology and mine. It's one biology. There's no boundaries there. What do we do once we recognize that? It's one climate. Mm-hmm. How do we look at the relationship of climate and COVID, or more accurately, maybe, what does the pandemic experience open up about how we look at the climate crisis?
That's a great question.
I mean, we've been told for years by our adversaries that, aside from the denial problems, like, you can't possibly change the global economy that quickly. You can't pay for it. You can't change things that quickly. Look at how quickly we've changed the economy in the last month of the globe, because we needed to. Now, I would say we need to around the climate also. We don't have the awareness, the realization, the sense of urgency there that we have around the pandemic. But there's a teaching moment here. There's a learning moment here. There's an opportunity if we communicate well, and if we're lucky, and if we can build some examples in the right places for people to say, wow, there really is something different we can do here. There really is a risk. There is know-how. There are resources. There's complex challenges, but we can move on this. So I'm very interested in that, in how we interpret those two stories, and how we learn from, how each of them learns from the other, and how we open up some sense of creativity here. The other thing that I quoted Flores as saying in the essay that you read, he said, this is, we're going to come out of this potentially with everything in the world being reconfigured. Now, is he right? I don't know. Well, like I said before, we can't judge the predictions in advance, but you can sense something like that is afoot. You can sense that there's a profound reconfiguration at all kinds of levels all across the world. What does that mean? What does that open? What would we want it to look like?
Right.
And
what do you want it to look like? Or are you not going to hazard a guess there?
How much time you got?
We don't have a ton of time, because we really want people to watch this. We don't want to like go on and on, but just, yeah, it's like, just even get out your paintbrush and just put some strokes on the canvas.
Human solidarity,
mm-hmm.
Recognition that we're one biology on one planet, solidarity with all living things. It's not just human solidarity. It's that, look, one of the things I learned from Bucky Fuller almost 50 years ago is that we live on this 8,000-mile diameter ball of rock, hurtling through space at, 18,000 miles an hour. And this ball of rock is covered with a thin, tissue-thin film of life in this thing we call the biosphere. I mean, it's so thin that if you took a basketball-sized stainless steel sphere, got the picture? Holding it, and you breathe on it, it's going to fog, right? We all know that. The depth of that fog to scale is thicker than the biosphere. We live in this little fragile zone of life as one unified bunch of life with a common interest with the seeds and the worms and the plants and the bugs and the eagles and all of it. We are all, as Bruno Latour calls it, Terrans, living on this planet called Terra. And there's the opportunity for having solidarity at that level. And what does that mean? It means that how we provide energy, how we farm, how we handle water, how we treat goods and services, how we deal with our forests, all that gets different if we accept that as the reality that we live in. What are the mechanisms? Well, we have to move from an economy that prizes the free market, but that lies. Adam Smith said a couple hundred years ago that that perfect markets depend on perfect information. But we have markets that don't price the cost and value of the atmosphere, that don't value clean water, don't value biodiversity, don't value human well-being, subsidize the things that destroy us. The US subsidy to the fossil fuel industry is bigger than the annual investment in the Pentagon. So, at a certain level, it's very simple. If I had to pay $20 a gallon at the pump for my gas, would I drive the car that I'm driving? No, of course not. Would anybody even be making the car that I'm driving? Of course not. So for me, that's one of the important leverage points. How do we get the prices right? How do we have the economic decisions that we make reflect the real costs and benefits, real physical living system costs and benefits of the actions that we take? I have a certain faith that most folks aren't evil people bent on destroying things. Most folks are living their lives the best they can with what they have and what they know. And we live in markets. We've lived in markets for thousands of years. Markets have signals. Our signals have gotten very abstracted and very disconnected from the real world. Let's connect them back up. So I'd want to see that. We can talk about politics and economics more, but I think one of the fundamentals to all this is that we've learned to look at the world and see separate things in pieces isolated from each other, when in fact the world is an interconnected phenomenon without boundaries except the ones that we name, where things affect each other, and where if we can recognize systems rather than try to manage pieces of systems,
right,
we're going to be much wiser and much more effective. It's a very different framework that we live in. We've been in a mechanistic reductionist worldview for a very long time. Fortunately, we have a planetary history going back thousands, if not tens of thousands of years of different ways of orienting to living in the world. Now, the life of an Australian Aborigine, very different than the life of a factory worker in Ohio. But maybe there's something we can learn across that gulf.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing, it's really interesting that where you started, mm-hmm. And I'm not going to like take this super far, even though I probably want to. You started with solidarity.
Yeah.
And solidarity, encompasses a lot. It encompasses the public health and the universal basic income, social welfare. Welfare is not a sin. Welfare is what we're aiming for. Mm-hmm. And then you went to systems.
Right there at the start of the Constitution.
Right.
To promote the general welfare, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not a liberal idea or a conservative idea. It's a foundation of this country and probably most countries.
Yeah, so it's solidarity, it's systems, understanding that things are interconnected, mm-hmm. And it's signals, market signals, mm-hmm. that we're good people getting the wrong information, and so making distorted choices, subsidies. I'm not being cute about the S's, but this is what I'm taking from you is it's almost like a framework. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I heard from you,
we're living in the wrong story.
There we go. We got another S. But the other thing I'm really curious about, and if we ever circle back around to this conversation or are together in another one, or even so, I think it's a key question is that this pandemic is doing for us what nothing else in our activism could do in terms of climate. It gave us a real and immediate threat that mobilized this solidarity, mm-hmm. and what we've been aching for in terms of an appropriate response to climate disruptions
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, depending on which expert you're talking to, it's too late, or it's way too late, or it's really too late. It's like, you know, it's, you know, that this is we're hanging on by a thread now. But and so I think that's a conversation that you and I will have with our colleagues over the next months, about how do we translate this, you know, without doing our old environmental stuff of like, I know and you don't, and I'm going to insert my good thing into your brain. But, you know, how do we really learn together? And I think what you're talking about solidarity and systems, that these are the sort of like, these are the thought form keys to the climate crisis that we're facing, which is, I feel like we're facing COVID, or we're facing the pandemic, and right behind it is something even bigger that we can't see because we're nose up against this one. So anyway, if you'd like to make a final comment, I'm trying to keep these relatively brief so that people will harvest something.
Yeah. Well, let me say this. You know, what solidarity comes down to is a commitment to care for each other. Mm. And, you know, as I said, in the broadest possible sense of who each other is. And to do that, we need to recognize what each other cares about. Mm. Part of the power of a crisis like this is that we are all caring about the same thing at the same time. So we have an opportunity for solidarity there. But to know what people care about. Well, you know, the great farm organizer Merle Hansen said years ago, I remember the speech like it was yesterday, he said, you know, the good Lord gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth that we might listen twice as much as we speak. And so there's the opportunity to listen not just to ourselves and each other and the people who agree with us, but to get out and not go try to plant ideas in the heads of climate deniers, but build relationships and listen and understand their cares, and give them a chance to understand our cares and find where there are common cares. Mm-hmm. Dramatically now with COVID. I don't know if do we have time for a 2-minute story here or not?
We totally do. I mean, this is endless. It can be endless. I'm just trying to be.
And you can edit me wherever you want.
I'm not going to do any editing. This just goes up as it is.
My friend and former colleague Bill Reid, who is a lapsed architect, one of the creators of the LEED green building rating system. We were business partners for a number of years. And he talked about a project he was brought in on. It was a private school in the Northeast United States that was wanting to expand the school, and they wanted to do the eco-grooviest school anyone had ever done. And they were shocked when they found that people in the neighborhood didn't want this, didn't want it so much that they were lawyering up. And so there's the prospect of lawsuits between neighbors and all that. And they brought Bill in. And he asked that they gather together everybody who had any way of touching this project, obviously students and their families, the teachers, the school administrators, the service providers, the staff, the county zoning officials, the lawyers on both sides, like, you know, everybody who had some relationship to this project, got them in a room together. And figuratively, as he tells it, locked the door. And went around the circle and said, Vicki, what's your position on this project? And you'd say, I'm for it, the kids need it. And the next person would say, I think it's a terrible thing. Went around the room, everybody in the room, what's your position on this project? And then he went around again and said, well, why is that your position? Went around again. And then asked for the reason behind that why, and went around again. You know, some people may recognize this as akin to the Toyota five whys process, which enabled them to leapfrog quality in the steel industry. He went around the room again and again and again until people looked around, and these are people who are ready to go into legal battle with each other for 5 years, looked around and said, we actually all agree. We actually care about the same things. When you get out of the positions and the ideology and the expressions of strategy down to what do you care about for yourself, your kids, and your community. And everybody wanted the kids to have good education and to be safe and to, you know, be equipped for the world to come and so forth. And at that point, I think it was about a day and a half in, Bill said, okay, now let's start to design the project. Mm. They had already had a very sophisticated, sustainability-oriented design. They wound up like 60% more energy efficient than where they started, more water efficient and so forth. And the killer metric is that this county that hadn't given a zoning variance in 10 years gave them a zoning variance in months. So they saved, you know, they saved years of permitting, they saved years of litigation, they saved millions of dollars of extraneous spend, and they saved the relationships in the community. And they did that by listening to each other, even where they thought they were completely at odds.
Right.
So I think for me, there's great promise in that story. We started off talking about hope. That's, right. That's a place where I find hope.
So I know I said we're done, but we're not. Because I have a final question. I think it's a final question, which is, what does your faith, as in Judaism, offer to you in this moment that's helpful?
Wow. I thought that's what we were going to talk about. Trying to be succinct about this. Let me say two things, Vicki. One is the sense that what's behind all of our religious and spiritual teachings and laws and practices and so forth. And I'm more familiar with this in Judaism than in other faiths. It may well be true in other faiths too, but what's underlying all of our practices is a commitment to community that works. Look at all the laws through shaping how do you have a society that takes care of people and that works. So that's one thing. A rabbi of mine said years ago, he was talking about the 10 commandments, and he said, they're not really commandments. In Hebrew, they're utterances. They're the 10 things that God spoke. He said, it wasn't, what if, in this tradition, we spin stories around the text a lot. That's a traditional practice. And he said, what if it was more like God saying, hey, psst, Vicki, come here. I want to tell you something. I want to let you know a secret. This is how stuff really works. If you do things this way, it's going to go a lot better for you than if you do things that way. Up to you, but kind of this is my advice. But, you know, it's going to be blasphemous to some people, but I love that story. The other thing is that there is, and Rabbi Michael Lerner writes about this very creatively, is that there's a profound sense of infinite creative possibility. The word in Hebrew in the Bible that's translated as the Lord in King James and other translations is a curious word in its grammatical construction. It can be read as meaning was, am, will be. That's who spoke to Moses from the burning bush, was, am, will be. Moses says, what should I tell the people your name is? So tell them that's what it is, which is the sense of continuous unfolding, open possibility. One of my favorite prayers in the Jewish liturgy is acknowledging God for bringing into being newly every day the works of creation. So that's where I sit in the question that you asked. We ain't done yet.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we're partners in that process.
Yeah, right. That's one of the many things that's so beautiful to me about Judaism. Well, thank you so much. What a deep dive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should do this again.
We should do it again, darling.
I might have some questions for you, my dear.
Okay. I've got endless words. Thank you so much,
No problem.
really. Yeah, and I'm inspired to have such conversations with other people, if only for my own enjoyment. Okay, Gil, thank you. Ciao, ciao.
I know.
Bye.
Kitchen Queen.